Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien here on the morning of Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. Sitting in for Paul Harvey this morning. Stand by for the rest of the story. Well, Americans, Paul Harvey did this story back in the late 60s or 70s, and it took me 25 years, but I've checked all. And I'll redo the story because it's right as Mr. Harvey said. Disregard what the historians are telling you because don't want you to know the truth, unfortunately. And it's a truth that you have to learn. Mr. Harvey called this story the footwear wars. Okay? And you have to understand when Mr. Harvey did a story, him and his checkers, before it went to broadcast, he wanted to make sure he got it at least 99.99999% right and accurate and true. There's no such thing as 100% true. If somebody tells you that, they're lying. But if you can get it to 99.9999999, and that's the best you can get it, and sometimes people who do stories can't get it that good. But if you can get it to 99.9%, you're doing good. Mr. Harvey used to get it a little further than that. Unlike other guys like Dan Rather. Yeah. Oh, and don't forget Brian Williams of NBC. That's why Mr. Walter Cronkite used to really growl at Dan Rather because Dan Rather would go and broadcast things that he knew weren't right, and he didn't have 100% backing or sufficient 99.999% backing, and he still put it out there, and it came back to haunt him. Same with Brian Williams. Wilf Blitzer has done that a few times on CNN. Shame on him. Anyway, getting back to Mr. Harvey. When he did this story, and it was over 100 years, so I'm assuming it's late 1960s. He didn't say what time, when he did it. But this story happened on June 29th, 1863, in a town that you know very much, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now, so the historians tell you that Robert E. Lee went to Gettysburg and he started a battle with the Union Army in Gettysburg. Really? It's not that easy like that. No. And the Union Army under George Meade got lucky in more ways than one. Let me explain and tell you what Mr. Paul Harvey was trying to explain to you when he did this story. Mr. Robert E. Lee used to always try to get an upper hand on battles that he thought. He never thought he won a battle, okay? And he was looking for the first one. On the Union side, well, he had dismantled the Union armies and Bull Runs 1 and 2, or Manassas 1 and 2, whichever way you want to look at that, Shiloh, and Antietam turned out to be a stalemate, costly for the Union soldiers. All those wars were costly. The Confederates were losing people, but they weren't costly like they were to the Union. Not yet, anyway. But they were costly in other aspects. And here, Mr. Robert E. Lee, or General Robert E. Lee, said in his papers, we'll support this. He went to Pennsylvania to show the Unions that he could actually devastate them in their home territory, and especially the Republicans. What was his goal? Well, put it this way, it wasn't Gettysburg. But if you look at where he was at the time, he was making a little turn to the right. He was purposely missing Gettysburg, okay? The only thing, if you turn to the right from Gettysburg, well, you got Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, 110 miles away. That's not bad. You could get there in a day and a half at full march. Washington, D.C., 65 miles. Baltimore, around 90 or so over there. And his home, which he really aggravated him, Arlington, was 66 miles. Because remember, that sits right next to Washington, D.C., overlooking Washington, D.C. But back in May 14th of 1861, the Union, because he left his house, had taken over Arlington. Okay? That's a different story. But see what I mean? And this is what Mr. Harvey was looking at, too. And he was saying, oh, man. But what happened? Well, the force that General Lee was bringing up to Pennsylvania was huge. But it wasn't all ready for fight. I mean, General Pettigrew, who was in charge of a huge portion of it, he had 2,400 troopers that didn't have any shoes. Because of the two battles that they haven't been resupplied yet. He needed shoes badly. And another 3,500 or so, their shoes were starting to disintegrate, and in about a couple of weeks, they would be in the same position as the 2,400 were. So he was dragging General Lee's army back, and it was slow, which allowed the Union forces to find out where he was, and allowed General George Meade to bring his forces up towards him. And they were going to convene at Gettysburg. Now, Mr. General Lee didn't know this, okay? But he had to stop because he couldn't force march these guys with no shoes and these other guys that needed shoes. And one of his scouts went to the local city, Gettysburg, and came back with the local dim black. That's what we used to call it where I'm from. Your paper, dim black. Yeah. Which, my grandfather used to call it dim black. And everybody else I knew in the Canal Zone used to call it dim black. Yeah. What's your local paper? And when I looked at that paper back in 1984, because I heard the story back in 1984, even though it was done 10 years or so before that. Paul Harvey, he did a lot of them, and you had to really, he did over 2,000 of these stories. 2,000 people, that's a lot. Well, when I read that, I was in Gettysburg in 1984, and this is before they got all these museums. They're opening a new museum, by the way, in April. So if I were you, I would go over there, and it's supposed to be a good museum. But they didn't have that much stuff in 1984. But they did have the copies of the compiler, and I got the June 29th copy. I asked them for it, and they were looking at me kind of funny. You really want the June 29th? You don't want this other day or that? No, June 29th, please. Okay. And then I looked at the front, and there it was. The Democrats have a good chance of winning big time in 1864. Yeah. Pennsylvania, it was supposed to be a red state. Yahoo! Yeah, they're putting this on this paper. Okay. So then I went to the other part that Mr. Harvey was looking at, because I wanted to check for two advertisements that he mentioned in this story. One was about a washing machine, and sure, it was by, hold on. The washing machine's name was the Excelsior washing machine. It'll wash everything for you. Yeah. cost $8. Yeah. 1863, a washing machine. You people. Yeah. And the other one was from a store called R.F. McElhenney. And it specialized in footwear, boots, shoes, for cold and hot. Okay. So General Pertigue, in charge of this, and two other generals, Hill, and I forget who the third one was, but they were all suffering from this. And of course, General Lee had no choice but to slow down and eventually halt in June 27th, 1863, bringing it almost to a crawl because he couldn't afford to move any further. Okay, so he, in June 29th, when they saw this, he sent 2 scouts over to Gettysburg, which was about 10 miles away. So they went over there looking for R.F. McElhenney, and they were supposed to, get at least 2,400, if you can, more pairs of boots and shoes. Yeah. Boy, how could they do that? They didn't even know the size. Well, that's a different story, 2,400. Well, the scouts came back. We saw a Union detachment in the city. We decided to hightail it back. And he says, well, did they see you? No. Just a small little detachment. So he ordered General Pertigue to send a small force of about 800 into Gettysburg on June 30th to procure the shoes. Procure. That means take away, whether you pay them or not, well, you just get the shoes. Remember, this is war. Yoo-hoo! Hey, people, you understand me? Okay. So Mr. Pertigue goes over there, and he doesn't get to the city. He just sees that there's a lot more Yankees than he thought there was, and he went there. Meanwhile, this is June 30th, and General Lee has not had a chance to fort defenses, so he had to, in a hurry, fortify his position, which was unattainable where he was. The Union had the upper hand. All he had to do was send a message to Pickett, because he needed his forces in order to eliminate the blockade that the Union would cause and the stalemate that was coming. Where unbeknownst to him, and unbeknownst to the historian, the stop for the shoes and the procurement of shoes caused a holocaust that lasted from July 1st through July 3rd of 1863, and thousands of people died, both from the South, from the Union forces, from the Confederate forces, and the inhabitants of Gettysburg because of shoes. Sitting in for Paul Harvey, this is your favorite alien. And now, you know the rest of the story. Good day.